much. In Afghanistan, the critical question in the mind of Afghans mostly discuss and think about is about U.S. troops' presence in Afghanistan. And many times Trump has spoken about total withdrawal from Afghanistan. What is your thoughts about U.S. future of troops in Afghanistan?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I think it's understandable that any president, actually, because the previous president also wanted to draw down and ultimately to leave Afghanistan. And as a former commander who knows the price of what we're doing there, again, anyone would want to leave Afghanistan, but the question has to do with under what conditions. And we have to be absolutely certain that our national interests would be preserved were we to leave. That has to do, obviously, with the desire of al-Qaeda and now also of the Islamic State to reestablish the kind of sanctuary that existed in eastern Afghanistan when the 9/11 attacks were planned there by al-Qaeda during a time when the Taliban controlled the bulk of the country. I have actually said on publicly in an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal that we should have a strategy for staying rather than a strategy for leaving. Certainly we should try to enable the Afghan security forces and other Afghan institutions as much as we possibly can.
Thank you. You mentioned Wall Street Journal. I was going to refer to the next question that you spoke about withdrawal from Afghanistan will be repeating Iraq mistake. Reiterating on that, are you advocating for permanent presence of U.S. troops in Afghanistan?
No, not permanent. But again, look, we've been in Korea for 7 decades or something like that. We've been in Europe even longer with tens of thousands of troops in each location. They're there because there's a reason for them to be there. There are national interests. I think there are continued national interests in Afghanistan. And keep in mind that Afghanistan is also a very important platform for U.S. and coalition forces when it comes to the regional counterterrorism campaign that has been going on. It's well known that the raid that was conducted that resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden was launched from Afghan soil. In fact, it was during the period that I was the commander in Afghanistan. Beyond that, obviously, we also want to help the Afghan people preserve the gains that they have made, to preserve the big strides forward.
You express your reaction to talks with the Taliban as troubling, and do you think Taliban are committed to peace and stability in Afghanistan, or they're just after throwing Afghan government and the security will be still an issue?
And I think, frankly, the Taliban would like to get us out by whatever way they can. It's not clear to me that they would intend to share power or to be part of the constitutionally mandated structures of governance and so forth, or participate in elections. Beyond that, I also have some other real concerns. Number one, I don't think the Taliban can even commit all of the Taliban to laying down their weapons. I think that many of the Taliban, in fact, we've seen this in recent months where they've been defecting to al-Qaeda and the Islamic State because they want to continue to fight and to carry out other illegal activities in many cases as well, criminal activities. They can't commit the Haqqani network, they can't commit al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, or the Tariqi Taliban, Pakistani. So while it would be a very important achievement to have the Taliban lay down their weapons and to participate in Afghan society and governance and so forth.
You are aware there are so many other militant groups in Pakistan, and U.S. and Afghanistan usually always blame Pakistan for harboring terrorists and militant groups. And do you think Pakistan has a role or is committed for peace in Afghanistan?
Well, Pakistan could play a very important role, but obviously we've had reservations over the years about its willingness to truly control the areas in which groups like the Afghan Taliban and, again, Haqqani Network, IMU, al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and others have established sanctuaries outside of Afghanistan. I mean, the Taliban leadership is called the Quetta Shura for a reason. That's roughly the area where they have their leadership, their headquarters, and that is obviously the capital of Baluchistan, a province of Pakistan. And there have always been questions, reservations about the willingness and also the ability of Pakistani forces to take control of these areas, to wrest control from extremist groups.
So what's your thoughts about Trump's policy, defense policy towards the region, towards Afghanistan, Pakistan? Do you think he's in the right path of defense and security for that region?
Well, first of all, let's recognize that the administration did actually increase the U.S. And then also together the coalition commitment to Afghanistan. Beyond that, there has been pressure on Pakistan. There has been a lot of negotiation with them. Again, I have admiration for Ambassador Khalilzad. I've worked with him in Iraq when he was the ambassador to the United Nations. He's a very capable and impressive individual. And certainly you should try to achieve a negotiated outcome, but only if it is an adequate and sustainable outcome, not if it is something that is going to result in us having to come back some years later because the achievements that we had were taken away or squandered by the agreement that was reached.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ambassador Khalilzad, the envoy. Recently, after the talks called off by President Trump, the Taliban delegated their visits and talks in Beijing and Moscow and Tehran. Do you think the neighboring countries like Iran, China, and Russia can impact peace in Afghanistan?
Iran has caused mischief in various times. It has armed certain Taliban. They're obviously in the southwest part of the country. Russia has a very complicated history, to put it mildly, with Afghanistan going back to the Soviet days. It would like to contend that it has great influence and so forth. I think that's not really the case. China has been involved to a degree. It's made some investments, but they've actually never really capitalized on those. Don't get me wrong, every one of these countries could play a constructive role, but it would not be a decisively constructive role. At the end of the day, this is an Afghan problem with the enemies of Afghanistan, or at least of the current Afghan government and people, and now I would contend customs and current traditions even. Those enemies, unfortunately, have sanctuaries for their headquarters that are outside of Afghanistan.